with respect to the economy, it is absolutely clear, sir, that we can't do everything at the same time. Before COVID, we couldn't do everything at the same time. And certainly as it relates to the situation today, where we are still very clear that the areas with respect to growth, we now need to focus on execution and make sure that we can get through this very, very, very critical period. But that the focus, sir, the focus with respect to being able to ensure that we can build out those economic opportunities going forward is going to be critical. And I want to say to Barbadians this evening, sir, this evening, that the opportunities that present themselves to this country, we cannot let pass. And we cannot let pass either individually, sir, or even collectively as a country. And that is why we have been focused so hard in trying to make sure that we get the structures right, sir, for execution. Because ordinary Barbadians out there, sir, are feeling it hard. We know that there is still some level of uncertainty with respect to the state of the economy. But the government, in shielding Barbadians as best we can, sir, as best we can, from what clearly is a world that seems hell-bent, sir, on continuing to provide uncertainty for ordinary people, that in Barbados, the government certainly will try its utmost, its very best, to shield Barbadians as much as possible from what's happening externally. But the reality is, sir, is that if the world goes to war, it will have serious consequences. And we've already started to see some of those consequences with respect to the response to the actions in Ukraine. And I, sir, hope that it will be short-lived. I hope it will be short-lived. I also hope, sir, that throughout the course of this year, that we will not see any further disruptions by way of natural disasters or any other disruption, sir, because the truth is that the economy as it stands now and our capacity, sir, as a country to respond is actually quite constrained. But we have always made choices, and I want to make that clear to the public. We have always made choices with respect to when to suspend programs within government, sir, how to enhance or increase any social protection mechanisms, because at the end of the day, sir, we have chosen over the last 2 years, irrespective of the circumstances that we've found ourselves in, we've consulted, yes, with our partners at the International Monetary Fund, who, understanding very clearly that in the midst of, it is not just an external shock, sir. This has been global disruption. Global disruption. So you can't treat it in the normal sense as if it's an isolated incident. And therefore, we have had to respond very clearly to keep the stability of Barbados as we know it. Because the truth is, we have said for a long while that the only real asset that we have in this country, sir, really is our human capital. But that human capital, sir, creates the stability. And how we've been able to treat to each other, sir, over the last 2 years, I believe we have been able to do a good job, certainly as government. I believe, sir, certainly the result of the election demonstrated that leadership that we gave to the country, certainly prior to COVID, but particularly, sir, during the COVID pandemic, that in spite, sir, of the significant shock that we experienced, most, if not all, of the government services, sir, continued. The public continues to see results in response to a number of matters that were long-standing across the country. And yes, there are a few other matters that we still are yet to resolve. But as with everything, if you pause, sir, to make sure that families can eat in this country, and when you have an ash fall and you make sure that you bring some people on, sir, to make sure that we can get the place cleaned up, that is expenditure, sir, that we did not expect to put out. And therefore, as deliberate choices as a government, sir, we must understand that, one, the capacity for the country, sir, to understand that in moments like these, we must ensure that the most vulnerable amongst us, sir, are protected. It is the government's responsibility, in a sense, sir, to make sure that it can provide some level of security in these sets of circumstances. And certainly, sir, it is the mandate of this government, as I suspect we were elected to do, is to ensure that in these very critical times, sir, that we can look after as many people as we can. Now, as we pivot now, sir, and I say to the country, as we pivot now, because we have to live with COVID, and living with COVID means, sir, that the decisions that each of us will make in our daily lives will matter. And I start by saying very clearly this afternoon, sir, in order for us to grow this economy, and when they're talking about grow now, sir, I expect that we will replace the activity that we lost because of COVID. So over the course of 2022, and even into a little bit of 2023, I expect, sir, that we should be able to come back to the level that we were at at the end of 2019. I expect that to happen, sir. Global uncertainty notwithstanding, I expect that to happen. So I want the public to understand that what I refer to when I talk about growth is not coming back to where we were before. I'm talking about a new absolute focus, sir, in ensuring that every day as we go to work, sir, whether you're a public servant or whether you're in the private sector, sir, that every day as we go to work, if you're in the public service, you got to ask yourself, sir, what am I doing today to make sure that some private activity, sir, can take place and take place quicker? And if you're in the private sector, sir, the conversation now, sir, must change with respect to growth. Is not just to get back to the kind of money that you were making before and feel happy with that, sir. Growth now means we must develop, sir, a very clear and aggressive export culture. Export culture, sir. Because we cannot, in this global environment with all of this uncertainty that's happening, sir, we cannot rely on just the 166 square miles, sir, with respect to where we were comfortable, and don't expect that the next shock, sir, that may come along, that it will not impact us. So we must absolutely, sir, ensure that we are focused, sir, on ensuring that we can export goods and services, sir, every single day. And one of the critical things that I would say to Barbadians that we must look to with respect to the labor market. Because in the same way that we have had a welcome stamp program where persons have come here to work, providing services for people overseas. I know that there are few people in the economy that do that, but regrettably, sir, that is too far and in between for it to be impactful. So the reality is, sir, that we now must pivot and realize that we too as Barbadians, can provide our services globally using the technology, sir, in order to earn an income. And therefore, we must not look at the picture as if, sir, there's no planet outside of, or no space outside of Barbados. We have to change our perspective, sir, with respect to what we're doing, and you would have heard, certainly within the context of the budget presented by the Prime Minister, very clear elements, sir, with respect to how we are going to see and achieve growth. The reality of this circumstance is this, sir. New revenue streams for the country means that there will be fiscal sustainability. But in a crisis, sir, the government must respond. And we have chosen, over the last 2 years, one, to increase our borrowings, not because we wanted to increase our borrowings, sir, because I want to make it clear. We are very much committed to bringing down the debt to 60% of GDP. The 60% is not magic, sir, but it is just a benchmark to let the country be aware that this is a discipline that we must put on ourselves if we're going to open up avenues, not just for investment, but opportunities in the country. I do not want to ever live in a Barbados, sir, where nobody in Wharton or Kingston or anywhere, sir, got to put food in the fridge because the garbage ain't getting collected, sir. And we can never ever go back to those kinds of days again. And I want to say to Barbadians that the reforms that we have undertaken as a government have benefited all Barbadians. And therefore, we must ensure now that as we go forward, that we continue to maintain the discipline, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the discipline that would afford ordinary citizens, but also, sir, to ensure the quality of services to the public that we have become accustomed to. Because we grew up in a Barbados where things worked, sir. And regrettably, when you don't maintain something, sir, and you try to go and start it, there's always be something that you got to fix. Always something you got to fix, sir. And that is the situation that we found ourselves in. Because every time, sir, we try to move on something, because of the neglect of the last administration, sir, there's always something that we have to figure out what's going wrong now. Because there has not been an attention to detail, sir, consistently. And therefore, I say to the public that as we continue to undertake, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not just the digitization, not just the delivery of basic things like water and garbage collection, but we must understand and hold the state-owned enterprises to account with respect to the delivery of those services, and the government itself with respect to the delivery of these services, because in making the option available with respect to user fees and those types of things with respect to services, it is important to build back, sir, that trust between the government and the public. And I believe, sir, that that is part of the reason why we are all here again. I believe genuinely, sir, we are all here again because Barbadians have seen a substantive difference, sir, in the delivery of public services to them over the last 4 years, which is important because that is what a government is supposed to do. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, financing our way out of this is the challenge. And I ain't gonna tell you no lie, sir. I mean, you can't lie to Parliament anyhow, but I can tell you, financing our way through this pandemic has been a challenge. And I raised the point earlier of the fact that we had to borrow monies because, sir, the revenues dropped. The place was shut down. And I want to make this very point, sir, so that people understand why reforms are so important. Yesterday, you heard the Prime Minister refer to the fact that we had to give the BTMI monies with respect to their support when we had, in fact, introduced the airline travel and development duty in 2018 in order to take those off budget. But what is less known, sir, is that the Grantley Adams International Airport, and I make this point in the context of reform. When we looked initially at what we needed to do in the state-owned enterprises that needed reform, sir, the Grantley Adams International Airport was one of the few state-owned entities that had a very strong balance sheet, sir. But the moment, sir, that passenger travel stops, the airport effectively becomes just a warehouse, empty space. And we had to give the airport support for the first time in probably the existence of the airport. And therefore, the reality of the choices that we've had to make underscores that even an entity that was one of the strongest could be shaken, because none of us could ever conceive, sir, none of us could ever conceive that commercial air travel would stop for such a long period of time. It didn't even stop when 9/11 happened, sir. It just stopped in the United States, but it was still happening globally. And therefore, in this type of environment, sir, it is important that the reforms that we are undertaking within these state-owned enterprises, that the reforms are not just about getting the balance sheet right. The reforms has to be about not just, and as well as the proper delivery of public services. But a number of these agencies now, sir, working collaboratively with the private sector, and agriculture certainly is a critical cog in the mix. Export, sir, has to be part of the game with respect to the output, because if taxpayers, sir, are going to continue to support through the direct transfers these entities, they must be capable, sir, of delivering the output that is required to assist within the context of the private sector to ensure that we can get an export culture that helps it to earn its keep in this country. And these reforms, sir, and I know that the Minister of Agriculture will elaborate later on it, but when the Prime Minister spoke to the SPSS legislation yesterday, I want Barbadians to understand that this is not just a wish list. There are a lot of people in this country, sir, that raise chickens in this country. And the capacity for us to be able to open up a market for export, sir, would mean that there's access to markets, access to financing, where ordinary people in this country, sir, can start to earn more money. And therefore, it is not just legislation, it is not just reform, it is about making sure that ordinary people in this country, sir, who are doing regular things, that they're not just hurting their head, sir, about because they want to expand, they want to do more, but the market just isn't big enough, sir, in order to make sure that they can get a little more. And as things get more and more uncertain globally, you need that space, that buffer, sir, to be able to make sure you can provide for your family and your workers. And these are the kinds of critical interventions that are required. Because whether we like it or not, sir, whether we like it or not, we simply do not produce everything that we need in Barbados. But we have to earn money to pay for the things that we want. And therefore, we must now pivot, sir, to ensure that we absolutely are focused, sir, on how do we create an export culture, no matter what it is, sir, no matter what it is, an export culture that is rooted in strong design, sir. We will put the financing mechanisms in place because once you can get the orders and you get the production right, and I know that there are a number of initiatives being introduced by the BIDC to be able to get some of that structuring correct. And therefore, over the course of the next few years, we anticipate that if people understand that you focus on equality, and I know that BNSI would have to do some work in this space, but the quality assurance is there, then I know, sir, that we will be able to move this country to a different level simply because the transformation, sir, requires that we lift our game with respect to the quality of services that we're doing both in the public and as well as the private sector. Now, sir, there's been some discussion with respect to the fact that we have only limited the taxation on a few segments of the economy. And what we must understand, sir, is having carried the burden, sir, and I say burden because financially, sir, with an economy not fully functional, government had to respond in a myriad of ways. To maintain that very stability, sir, that means that any person investing in Barbados will be confident that they can get a return on that investment because of that stability. Entities, and we've all seen it, entities have made substantial profits, sir, in spite of the pandemic. In spite of the pandemic. And the reality is that and as I said earlier, we are not yet back to where we want to be. And by that, let me make it clear again. Where we want to be is not just at the level that we were at the end of 2019. Yes, I want the revenues to get back there quickly, but our focus now has to be growing the rest of the economy, growing outside of Barbados, because that is what is going to allow us, sir, to be able to continue with the transformation of this country. And continuing the transformation of this country does not mean, sir, that people have to fear, because I know that the training that is being rolled out across the board or continues to be rolled out is very, 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 very critical, sir. So if there are any person out there who believes that their job is at risk because of technology, sir, I say to them, pause. Look at where the world is going. Look and see what are the opportunities within the very space that you may have experience in. And you got to back yourself, sir, sometimes to be able to say, look, I'm going to step up to the plate and go and take this course. Humble yourself, sir, as we would say, and just accept that if you don't go with the flow sometimes, sir, then you'll be washed away. And therefore, training opportunities, whether inside the business, and let me make it clear, sir, don't wait for your employer to provide training for you. Training is available free on the internet. There are a lot of people using their time with social media, and I recall, sir, a young lady came to one of my clinics and looking for an opportunity. And when I asked her, I showed a number of options for training. She said she wasn't aware. But when I probed further, and this is something that happens across the board, people spend a lot of time on social media, sir. Not productive time, but a lot of time on social media. Unaware of the things that are out there that can actually help them. And therefore, I say to Barbadians, as I said to that young lady, you have to make a choice. Because if you want to change your circumstance, then you have to change your behavior. And to the extent that there are opportunities, not just in Barbados, and I know that the Ministry of Education in rolling out is not just a construction gateway, but I know the NTI is also doing tremendous work with respect to training. I want to say to young Barbadians, you have to determine what you want for yourselves. And in wanting something for yourselves, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it means that how you use your time. So every half hour or every 15 minutes, it matters. Because if you spend your time on that social media, not doing anything productive, then, sir, you're only hurting yourself with respect to prospects. Because for the person that goes out there, sir, acquires the skill, gets the training, then who you think, sir, the employer is going to choose between me, sir, who on Twitter and all these other things when the day come, and you, sir, who have gone and done the training in a productive manner, and when we both turn up for the job, I complain then that I get left out. And the truth is, sir, we have to make these personal decisions about how we spend our time, what we do, in order to make sure that we can move to the next level. The reality of our circumstance in the country is this, sir. The mindset with respect to output, productivity, you name it, sir, it has to change. And this government, I hope, has signaled to the country that we too, as government, we are changing. We are changing with the times. Because in order for us to be able to ensure that we can continue to maintain not just the economic stability, sir, not just the social stability, certainly the political stability is important. But there's a certain compact, sir, that we understand in the country, that when people are down, you've got to give them a hand up, sir, and you hold the hand as long as you can, sir, to make sure that they can find their way. But in holding the hand, sir, whilst you're holding the hand, they must be encouraged, sir, to ensure that they do not let any opportunity pass. And therefore, as we go through this process, sir, of trying to create and facilitate and encourage the private sector to participate in its own development, but equally, sir, to make the choices as individuals with respect to what we do with our time, whether at work or at home, is going to make a substantive difference, sir, with respect to where we go in this country. The truth is this, sir, that as we move forward, yes, decisions have to be made, as the Prime Minister said yesterday, with respect to whether we continue in a fund program or not. And the point must be made, sir, that when we came to office 4 years ago, no, almost, the condition certainly of the economy was very different to now, very different to now. But COVID has meant, sir, that the choices we had to make with respect to responding to the needs of people in a very extraordinary set of circumstances presents globally issues, obviously, for multilaterals with respect to the response to small island development states like Barbados. And therefore, we cannot ignore help when it is there. It is the same thing in your personal life. If people are there to help you, you must ensure that if you want help and you recognize that you need help, you accept the help. And I want Barbadians to understand that we are not yet out of the woods. Whilst we have changed our posture with respect to the management of COVID, we are not yet out of the woods. And therefore, at the appropriate time, and the program comes to the end at the end of March, sir, you can't be in two programs at the same time. That's like I know for some persons is difficult to understand. But for most of us, I believe, sir, you understand that if you are in a relationship, you don't talk about getting into another one unless the first one comes to an end. And therefore, you have to understand that any conversation around this can only start when you've concluded the first set of arrangements. But be that as it may, sir, the financing requirement out of this environment is going to be very important, and therefore we have brought to this chamber a number of measures that we believe, not just on the revenue side in terms of taxation, will help close the gap, but our engagement internationally, sir, will determine, certainly over the course of the next few months, will determine the ability of the government to close the financing gap. And equally, as we said, sir, getting the economy back up and running as quickly as possible will determine that. And we've been quite conservative with respect to our revenue forecast, given the uncertainty with respect to the global environment. And therefore, we are going to be monitoring like a hawk, sir, as we have been certainly over the last 2 years, where we are, and make the appropriate adjustments as we need to make with respect to the expenditure. But I want Barbadians to understand that without that social intervention that we took 2 years ago, right at the beginning, and I recall we met, it was at the other place, 2 years ago on April 1st, to pass supplementaries, which was the first time that in the history of the Parliament that you would have had to do something like that at the beginning of the fiscal year, that we did those things, sir, because people required its government to respond immediately. And therefore, it is not something that we took lightly. You don't take it for granted, but we need to ensure that you can support people and their families as best you can in these kinds of circumstances. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we announce our 2030 objective of becoming fossil fuel free, we understood clearly that you needed to make sure that there is a path to being able to achieve that. And as with everything, and the truth is, sir, what we announced yesterday perhaps would have been announced 2 years ago had it not been for COVID. But the reality is that we are here today in terms of what we are doing with respect to the electric vehicles and the other types of vehicles that are of alternate fuels. Because we still have to meet the target. We still have those objectives with respect as a small island to ensure that our environmental sustainability is at the highest level. We are working on a few operations with respect to how we will, which you will hear a little more in a few weeks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in relation to how we finance some of our marine space. And therefore, the government has been working continuously, in spite of COVID, sir, to make sure that we can bring benefits to ordinary Barbadians. And I know that when that particular time comes and we're able to announce that, sir, I want again to, and because a lot of consultations have already taken place with respect to that by the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, with respect to those stakeholders, and continuing now by the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central. The reality is that this is, again, is going to open up opportunities for a lot of young Barbadians, and we hope that we should be able to bring that to at least the start of that by the end of June of this year, so that we can start the very critical work with respect to responding more aggressively and raising more capital with respect to the response to managing some of our climate targets. And as the Prime Minister said yesterday, starting tomorrow we have a mission with the Green Climate Fund to look at the establishment of the Green Investment Bank here in Barbados. And these are things, again, Mr. Speaker, that are intended, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are intended to look at alternative ways of financing and bringing more capital for activity within the private space in Barbados to complement what the government is already doing. And therefore, as we move forward, coming out of this pandemic, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have to move with haste. And I know that anybody who's had a conversation with the Prime Minister for more than 5 minutes, and you tell the Prime Minister that you can get something done in 2 weeks, she will tell you she wants it done in 1. And it is good advice in the context that we have to push. So every instinct that we have to relax her, every instinct that we have to feel comfortable. I'm asking Barbadians this evening, sir, I'm asking Barbadians this evening, if you are feeling a little uncomfortable, or maybe, let me put it the other way, sir. If you are going through this year and you are feeling comfortable, it means you need to really check what you're doing. Because in developing a very clear focus, sir, very clear focus for what we are doing, either in the public sector or the private sector, sir, then that is not necessarily the mindset that is going to get us the kind of growth and output that we are looking for in this country. And I don't say that to make people uncomfortable, but we must recognize that in order for us to look beyond our current circumstance, and I know it is hard in a lot of households out there, sir. It is hard, because the last 2 years have not been kind to anybody at all, except for a few industries, but anybody at the personal level, it really has not been kind. But we have to find a way, and that's why I spoke earlier about those training opportunities. You must take advantage of them, because there's always a way out. It is how we spend our time, sir, how we look at opportunities, and there are a number of initiatives that were not mentioned in the budget, but that the government is working on to be able to give households options with respect to what we're doing. And one of those very critical areas, sir, I'm going to speak to very, very, very quickly, is that we have, and I know that in announcing that the government will seek to build 10,000 houses in 5 years, I want to say that the flip side of that, and I know that we will get that done, sir, but the flip side of that, sir, is that we now must show Barbadians that when you build a house, sir, and I know it's going to be a tough conversation, when you build a house, I know we hold on to it, sir, we hold on to it, and we're going to hold on because that's a family house. But the reality is the house is an asset, sir. It is an asset. And one, maintaining it is important, but as we move forward, sir, you're going to recognize that housing becomes an economic tool in the context of the regular economy. And therefore, it is something that we now must start to look to see whether or not, when is a good time to buy and sell from that perspective, sir, in order to make sure that we can extract from the housing market a return that we ordinarily wouldn't have been able to do. And that comes, sir, by understanding the valuation aspect with respect to your properties, the types of monies that people are putting in. And I understand that culturally, when we put down roots, we put down roots. And that is it. That is the family house, and we don't want to move from there. But I'm saying to Barbadians, there are too many properties around the country that are derelict, and we got to find a way, sir, to get them back into production, to become productive assets. And I know we're working on a number of measures, certainly with the Ministry of Housing, to be able to bring something to that effect for the country. But we cannot allow our assets, sir, our assets. We cannot allow our assets that we have worked hard for, that our mothers and grandfathers and everybody worked hard for, sir, to go out of production as you term it would use, because if you're not in it, sir, and it's not housing somebody, then it is a wasted investment. And whilst I know the government can't tell brothers and sisters how to get along with one another, the reality is that our foreparents, sir, worked too hard to get land, to build houses, for it to remain derelict and not in use, and therefore not become an asset that the family, sir, can benefit from. So we have to understand now, sir, and build a culture in the psyche of Barbadians as to what opportunities lie ahead, how we will create the structures and financing mechanisms to be able to assist with these types of things, sir. Because if you continue along the same path that we are on, sir, without changing the trajectory, then, sir, it means that at the next significant shock, then we will be exposed again, because we have not been able to give the kind of thought or production, thought or investment with respect to ensuring that we can maintain the type of the assets that we have and make them work for us. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this budget has come at a time when the country needs to see that there is a path, sir. Because the last 2 years the last 2 years have been very brutal, I would put it, on the economy. They've been brutal on families, sir. But in moving in this direction, sir, we believe that the pooling of those resources, sir, and the opportunities that we are rolling out with respect to not just renewable energy, the provision of homes, the reality is that in making those investments in alternative energy and how we think our lifestyle, then I know, sir, that we will be able to not just recover, but that we will bring as many Barbadians along with us on this journey to financial inclusion. And
Honourable Member, you have 5 more minutes.
Thanks, sir. Along this journey of financial inclusion and to ensure that there is real meaning to the enfranchisement that this party has long been known for. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I know that there are some people out there that they don't like reading anything that the government put out because they feel that we making it up, or that when we put it out, they feel that we're making it up. But on the other hand, they think that we're hiding something when we put it out. And it is a strange dichotomy, because the more information we publish, the more we share with the stakeholders, the more open that you are in the process, the more criticism you get. But the reality is, we continue, sir, to move at a pace that I hope that people will realize that the energy levels that we need to maintain to get out of an even deeper hole than we were in when we got in to government 4 years ago, that we need to be committed, absolutely committed in our minds, sir, that as Barbadians and as a country, that there is no challenge, sir, no challenge that will defeat us. And I can say to you, sir, and I can say to my constituents and to all of Barbados, that the budget presentation that you heard yesterday from the Prime Minister is the budget required for the moment. And whilst we cannot, and no government can ever do everything all in one go, and certainly not after 2 years of serious, heart-wrenching belly search, as we would say, sir, at school, from COVID. We are here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and this government will continue to provide the leadership that Barbadians have become accustomed to. The fiscal discipline that we have exhibited, sir, over the course of the last 4 years will continue. Be as comprehensive or as lavish as perhaps some people are asking for. The reality is, I believe that this government has stayed the course. We've delivered and improved on the delivery of public services. There's still improvement to be done, and I know that the ministries will be focusing on how we will execute that, certainly over the course of the coming years. But let us not forget, sir, that there was something called COVID. And as we live in a post-COVID, as we move to a post-COVID world now, sir, that I say to Barbadians, public and private sector, sir, you get up every day and you go and you make sure, one, if you're in the public service, that you're figuring out who are you helping today, sir, to do something faster. And if you're in the private sector, sir, what are you doing, sir, to make sure that you can export? And if we can do that both as the public sector and the private sector, and as individuals, sir, as individuals, that we assess what we do with our time, how we access training, how we improve our circumstances, either locally or internationally, sir, then I believe that that combination, sir, that combination aggressively, that we will be able not just to recover, but we'll be able to ensure that there is long-lasting stability as well as long-lasting prosperity, sir, for all of our citizens. And with those very, very, very few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable member for St. George North.
Speaker, I wish to start my comments to yesterday's budget by signaling that it clearly represents, in my opinion, the Prime Minister's response both to my constituents in St. George North, as well as to my demands on behalf of workers of Barbados generally and their families. The response to the price in petroleum products is one such clear indication. Others may have offered similar requests, but I am convinced that the strong voice of labor made a tremendous difference in the decision to have that reduction. Mr. Speaker, I happen to be aware that coming out of its 79th Annual Delegates Conference, held at the end of August last year, the Barbados Workers Union submitted a resolution to the Cabinet of Barbados captioned Reduction of Value-Added Tax. That resolution was submitted against the backdrop of that union's awareness of the negative effects which the energy policy was having on workers and their families, and called on the government to review its value-added taxing policy on fuel with a view to bringing immediate relief to energy costs in Barbados. But that was 6 months ago. 6 months ago, before the most recent exogenous shock occasioned by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the direct that war has had on spiking oil and food prices and inflation across the world. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the fact that our call was answered by this government, even at this time, causes us to regard it as even more commendable. Mr. Speaker, I can speak for the Barbados Workers Union, noting that it is equally pleased that another one of its demands made just before the budget to incentivize plans for the purchase of electric and hybrid vehicles can be seen in the presentation yesterday. Of course, the labor movement, not represented by the Barbados Workers Union alone, but worldwide, has been calling for a just transition to a future of work that creates jobs and that supports country strategies relating to climate action, where these maximize both the economic and social gains for our people. Deputy Speaker, it is for that reason that I am also pleased to support the measure to offer homeowners the opportunity to install photovoltaic systems on their roofs, making provision for them to purchase up to 10 kilowatts of energy without going through significant red tape to do so. This, in our view, widens the net beyond what the Barbados Workers Union has committed to be one of the objectives of its renewable energy project, which is to be rolled out at Mangrove. In the proposal presented yesterday, this would be afforded to all homeowners as a right. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am also pleased that there is a very firm commitment, which was repeated in the budget yesterday, for there to be a rollout of the Trade Union Recognition Act, which will soon be in the statute books, therefore, and where workers in Barbados will have the opportunity where they will not have to suffer the agony and indignity of previous generations as they have had to pursue their right to trade union representation and collective bargaining. Of course, I can go on about that, but I am sure that the opportunity for me to do so will come in a few months, where we will be debating that long-awaited bill. So instead, sir, I wish to refer to the importance which my constituents in St. George North attach to the housing plans which the government has defined. My constituents are among many other Barbadian families in search of land and housing. And I'm therefore very pleased that the minister responsible, my neighbor in St. George South, is charged with the responsibility to ensure and roll out decent housing as a matter of urgency. I'm also pleased at the plans for food and nutrition security, and I'm particularly happy that we will be moving away from a preoccupation merely with the supply of enough food to a commitment to supply healthy food. Mr. Deputy Speaker, beyond the question of specifics that will treat to individual members of the labor movement and individual constituents and individual people in our country, I am impressed and wish to congratulate the government on making this budget a call to arms, inviting all interests, all partners, all of our people to recognize that this is a national partnership, a national movement, which calls for all of us to contribute and which equally gives all of us clear indications of the manner in which we all can benefit. I believe that the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance refers to it as sharing the burden and sharing the bounty or sharing the benefit. Deputy Speaker, this budget should therefore be seen not merely as an effort by the Minister of Finance to cut and paste benefits and impositions, but Deputy Speaker, it should be seen certainly by me as an opportunity where I can be satisfied that working with the current administration, the labor movement, the Barbados Workers Union in particular, is seeing examples of how a government could be made to recognize its roots and its needs to cater to the demands of the working person and his or her family. Mr. Deputy Speaker, indeed, that is what I had in mind when I offered myself to the people of St. George North, and in so doing, offer the BWU a place in decision-making where our voice doesn't only have to be strong in opposition to things after they've happened, but where it could be put to good use to inspire meaningful change and fair and equitable growth. Deputy Speaker, it is, however, at this time that I wish to signal caution. In the first instance, I wish to caution this government, of which I am a part, and indeed this country as a whole, that our demand for labor has always been a demand for respect. I repeat that. Our demand for labor has always been a demand for labor to be respected. The possibility exists that some past business ventures and even some that are being contemplated, both in their previous tracks and in their current tracks, have created the impression that they are anti-worker and anti-union. Deputy Speaker, The union which I represent wishes to emphasize that our developmental and growth projections must be based on respect for human and trade union rights and must not include any elements of previous or present anti-trade union behaviors. Mr. Deputy Speaker, recognizing therefore that many employment opportunities are contemplated for the construction sector, I highlight this sector because it is one of the sectors that easily comes to mind where anti-union behavior, unfair work practices, and indignity is the order of the day. Deputy Speaker, perhaps I am signaling that there may need to be an infrared spectra applied to determine the different types of arrangements which exist in construction and those which ought to exist. But of course, not only for construction, but also within and across other sectors. Secondly, I am aware that the Prime Minister has spoken in very positive terms about relationships with state-owned enterprises. The recent experience of workers and their representatives, certainly the one that I can speak about, does not make for good reading, nor for good speaking. I am hopeful that ministers who are assigned to various state-owned enterprises will be in a position to advise their boards and their other subordinates to respect the need for respectful engagement at all times. And indeed, my clear expectation is that my parliamentary colleagues who have responsibility for ministries would most definitely lead by example, so that the BWU shouldn't be invited at minutes to midnight to a press conference, for instance, to have it reported thereafter that we didn't show up, without mention of the fact that we had late notice and prior engagements. Finally, Deputy Speaker, I commend the government's response to my union's request, which was repeated most recently in December last year, for a review of the allowances to apply in the public service. However, the Barbados Workers Union at 80 years old is fully aware that we cannot proceed merely on goodwill and good words. There is a need pressing upon us, even at this moment, for there to be the recognition that levels of remuneration in both private and public sectors must be addressed. The Prime Minister and Minister of Finance herself has made it clear in the budget that she recognizes the severe stress that it has placed on low-income earners, the most vulnerable in our society. This is a stress that has to be adjusted in the short term rather than as a long-term project. The choices made by our leaders across the world and the choices that we make here in Barbados, the choices made by all of us, will either help to create a just and sustainable future or maintain business as usual, where instability, inequality, exclusion, and disenfranchisement are the order of the day. While not perfect, I am satisfied that the measures that have been outlined are measures that are outlined to address the instability, the inequality, and the disenfranchisement which exists. Mr. Speaker, my support of the measures, therefore, is found in my view that they represent a comprehensive attempt to deliver a mix of policies that would kickstart our recovery and our progress. It is therefore my hope that in lending my support and that in lending its support, this House determines by our very actions to assure that these plans do not fail in the implementation. So, Deputy Speaker, with those few words, I am obliged.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Philip South.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, first of all, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in support of these budgetary measures that came at a time in our existence where we as a people should recognize the importance of what true government and governance looked like. And therefore, I am indeed grateful to the people of St. Philip South who would have given me the opportunity by reposing their trust and confidence in me to be able to stand in this honorable chamber and be part of what I consider to be a team for the times and a government for the times. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are living in very challenging times. There can be no doubt about what is taking place globally. There can be no doubt